There's a clock on the wall of that interrogation room. 47 hours, counting down. A woman sits across from the detective, calm, almost bored. She's just been arrested for homicide. And instead of defending herself, she smiles. Because she knows that, legally, her name and her identity don't exist in any database in the world. But while she plays mind games with the police, what nobody knows is that somewhere beneath the city, in the dark, flooded drainage tunnels, the real owner of that life is drowning, struggling to survive after being brutally betrayed and crushed by the one woman she admired most. This isn't just a story about a murder. It's the most ruthless con and the most twisted identity theft ever told. This is The Art of Sarah. This channel doesn't do recaps, it does autopsies. A poorly dressed woman dragged an enormous suitcase into a luxury boutique. No rush, no shame. She went through the store picking up bags worth hundreds of millions of won, photographing each one, methodically. When the staff moved to escort her out, she calmly announced she would pay for everything she had touched and opened the suitcase. Inside, cash. A lot of cash. So much that the staff had to bring out a counting machine to verify it. While she waited for the count to finish, she lay down on the floor next to the money and fell asleep. That was Sarah, a name that every power player in Korea's elite circles had heard and admired. A name that very few knew also belonged to a world-class con artist. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, police discovered a female body in a drainage ditch. Half of her face was disfigured, that her fingerprints matched nothing in any database. At the scene, only one item remained, a purple handbag. Unique material, unique color, a serial number, one of a kind in the world, irreplaceable. Investigators read it as a deliberate act of arrogance from the killer. The autopsy was revealing. Her face had been struck repeatedly with brutal precision. A revenge killing, without question. But the cause of death wasn't the blows. It was hypothermia. Police traced the bag's serial number back to its owner, Yeo Yin, the CEO of the cosmetics brand Nox. The moment she saw the tattoo on the victim's ankle, she collapsed. She confirmed the deceased was her friend Sarah. During questioning, Yeo Yin explained that Sarah was the regional CEO for Asia of the luxury label Boudoir. But the relationship between the two women was anything but ordinary. It all began with a Birkin bag. She described their first encounter, Sarah dragging a dusty suitcase, paying cash for a bag worth tens of billions of won. That moment left a mark she couldn't shake. Months later, Yeo Yin spent nearly all her savings and waited 6 months for a limited edition piece. That same day, in that same store, she spotted a bespoke bag of breathtaking craftsmanship. She knew immediately it was Sarah's. The rumors had been circulating through elite circles for some time. They said Sarah ran Boudoir across Asia, a mysterious brand with centuries of history, made for European royalty and the wealthiest people on Earth. But Yeo Yin was also going through a difficult period of her own. At a VIP event, a wealthy woman publicly humiliated her. She mocked her Korean brand, used the difference in status to shut her out of her circle. And right at Yeo Yin's lowest moment, a woman bumped into her accidentally, staining her bag. The woman didn't respond with coldness. She apologized and offered as compensation the very limited edition piece Yeo Yin had already seen in the boutique. That's when she understood the woman in front of her was Sarah. They met again in the parking garage. Sarah invited her for a drink. Yeo Yin would later say that Sarah always made offers that were impossible to refuse. And just like that, they became friends. The businesswoman admitted without hesitation that she desperately wanted to prove her worth in high society. Sarah, by contrast, that was so impeccably perfect that Yeo Yin felt as though her 40 years of loneliness had existed only to arrive at that moment. Sarah moved in with her. Her previous roommate had stolen her belongings. The perfect excuse. and that only deepened the bond. It didn't take long before Sarah casually floated the idea of building a hotel. Yo-yin saw it immediately, a life-changing opportunity. She wanted Knox to collaborate with Boudoir on supplying products to the hotel. Boudoir's reputation would elevate her brand's value. She approached Sarah, expressed her desire to invest 15 billion won, roughly 11 million US dollars. What followed was explosive. Boudoir shot into the stratosphere. Executives and celebrities came looking. Products sold out in minutes. In the first month alone, the Yo-yin received 1,500 million won, roughly 1.1 million US dollars in dividends. That only hardened her conviction. Yet the day Boudoir launched its newest product was also the last day the businesswoman ever saw Sarah alive. She said Sarah was like someone always ready to leave. Her suitcase had never been fully unpacked. After hearing the testimony, young Detective Mugyong noticed something unsettling. Yo-yin had carelessly placed her prized Birkin, a gift from her dead friend, directly on the floor. The detective suspected the bag was a fake, and that the friendship was too. Or perhaps the entire thing had been a carefully constructed performance from the very beginning. Mugyong quietly investigated the businesswoman's past. He discovered she'd had a dispute with Sarah over the 15 billion won investment. But those funds were public money that Yo-yin had embezzled. Police also cracked a parallel kidnapping case. It was she who had hired people to abduct Sarah and recover her money. The kidnappers grabbed the wrong woman. She was rescued in time, but the damage was already done. The perfect shield. In 1920, Charles Ponzi constructed one of the greatest financial frauds in history. His genius wasn't in deceiving innocent people. It was in something far more calculated, selecting victims who couldn't speak up either. Investors with money of questionable origin, men with secrets worth protecting, people who would rather absorb the loss in silence than explain where the funds came from. Sarah understood that principle with surgical precision. Yo-yin wasn't just a victim. She was an unknowing accomplice. And the 15 billion won, roughly 11 million US dollars, she invested was embezzled public money. By defending the investment to avoid embezzlement charges, Yo-yin became Sarah's most effective shield against any fraud accusation. The genius of the scheme wasn't in deceiving someone innocent. It was in turning someone guilty into her best line of defense. Think about that for a moment. Sarah didn't need her victims to be good people. She needed them compromised, entangled, with too much to lose if they talked. That is the difference between a common grifter and a true mastermind. One steals money, the other steals loyalty. And loyalty bought with fear is the most durable kind of all. Later in this video, I will see how Sarah applied this exact same principle to every single person who entered her orbit, and the price each one paid without ever realizing it. Outside the precinct, Mugyong came face to face with a woman carrying a walking stick and bearing wounds on her face. This was Hyawoon, the woman they had just rescued from the kidnapping. She was still sobbing. The detective offered her his tie to dry her tears, but after wiping her face, she said something cryptic and walked away. Mugyong didn't think much of it in that moment, but shortly after, he noticed something that didn't add up. Hyawoon had clearly stated she had injured her left leg, yet she was using the walking stick on the left side instead of the right. A basic error, too basic to be accidental. That small detail changed everything. Meanwhile, the internal investigation team received news that stopped them cold. They had reviewed every national record: name, date of birth, residence, education. Sarah did not exist in any database. The mysterious, seemingly flawless woman had been a complete fabrication from the very beginning. To understand how she built that lie, police went to speak with another key figure, Seanson, the notorious loan shark. But he told them an entirely different story. He was suffering from end-stage renal failure. Without a transplant, there was no cure. His brothers, his ex-wife, his children, his friend of 40 years, every single one refused to donate. At his darkest point, he met a girl named Dua, the same girl who would later become Sarah. The first time he saw her, he was drinking every day and had completely lost his will to live. At the hotel, he was so drunk and disruptive that everyone kept their distance. Everyone except Dua. She listened to all of it. And then she made a bold proposal. She was willing to donate him a kidney. In exchange for 5 billion won, roughly 3.7 million US dollars, and a legal alibi. They decided to get married. Officially, even if it was a farce. But the 5 billion won wasn't the real goal. Sarah knew that perfectly. To transform her life, it wasn't enough to watch how the wealthy spent their money. She had to understand how they became wealthy. With the right target, she could build an entirely new identity from scratch. During Seanson's recovery, she used him to manufacture that identity. Sarah, Cambridge graduate, executive of a centuries-old European luxury brand. The loan shark leveraged every contact he had to construct the false history. Whenever anyone brought up Cambridge, Sarah would deflect with absurd, irrelevant tangents. And yet, high society was utterly charmed by her attitude. A woman in the circle brought her into a more discreet world. No boring husbands, just attractive young men and magnates with secrets. Sarah didn't waste time. She began hinting that she planned to launch a business, bring a luxury brand to Korea. But being new to Seoul, she needed a space. One company president mentioned he had a building in Damdong, prime location, reasonable price. He just needed Sarah to increase the property's value. In a single conversation, Sarah secured the most coveted space on the most exclusive luxury street in the city. That was the first move. And Sarah understood perfectly the mechanics behind all of it. The more deliberately she pushed clients away, the more hunger she created. The value of a designer item has nothing to do with its cost of production. What people are chasing isn't the object, it's status, the feeling of superiority, the privilege of owning something others simply cannot have. What Sarah sold was that feeling, that value that can't be manufactured in a factory, but can absolutely be engineered in someone's mind. The bags were made in South Korea, body and straps separated, shipped to England for assembly, re-imported. That process made them legally products of foreign origin. That's how she built Boudoir, a luxury brand with a fabricated heritage. She invented a legacy on the internet, a glamorous story with a century of European tradition. Apple, a royal warrant from the British royal family. All lies, all immaculate. And simultaneously, she flooded the market with intentional counterfeits. Her logic was simple and brutal. If there are no originals, there are no fakes. But if fakes exist, it means the originals are real and worth copying. The counterfeit didn't threaten her. It validated her. While Sarah was building her empire, somewhere in the city an active investigation was closing in, and investigators already had her name. That was when Sarah found exactly what she needed. In a small workshop in Gangnam, she froze in front of a red bag embedded with diamonds, almost indistinguishable from the genuine article. The girl who had made it was precisely the person she had been looking for. That girl was Mi-young, a prodigiously gifted luxury bag designer working in an obscure backstreet workshop. But Mi-young's eyes weren't on the bag. They were fixed on Sarah's flawless makeup and jewelry. Sarah hired her entire workshop on the spot, asked her to recreate a design of extreme difficulty. Mi-young worked through the night, every detail treated like a work of art. When Sarah saw the result at dawn, she was stunned. The level of sophistication was near absolute. Up on the rooftop, beneath the night sky, Sarah told her that once the investment came through, she would take the bag into mass production. And she was certain of the work she would do. But Mi-young had no confidence in herself. She said she only knew how to imitate, that wasn't real talent. Sarah smiled. If it was that difficult to tell the real from the fake, how could something like that really be called fate? Generous advance payment, long-term collaboration, cash. Mi-young accepted. Sarah picked up on something strange immediately. A young woman with that level of talent, working in that place, asking to be paid in cash. She was hiding something. The artisan confessed she had run away from home as a child. No documents, no bank account. Sarah said half-jokingly that she was practically in the same situation, hinting that she too was running from something. As their working relationship deepened, Sarah began blurring the lines. She asked Mi-young to go to a luxury store and try on clothes on her behalf. They had similar figures. She gave Mi-young her name to use in the store. When Mi-young put on the elegant dress and looked at herself in the mirror, she became someone else. She went quiet. She felt strange and fascinated at the same time. Then came the phone, registered in Sarah's name, then the library card. Even without a university degree, you can understand the world. Then the membership card for whenever she needed something. Sarah was building her a life, not out of generosity, out of strategic necessity. Someone who doesn't exist in any record becomes a perfect extension of yourself. With just a taste of the privileges of the upper class, Mi-young became obsessed and found it impossible to let go. One day she found Sarah's wallet on the sofa. Instead of returning it, she used the membership card to visit the luxury boutique. Over the following 6 months, she repeatedly posed as Sarah in high-end stores. Everyone had heard of Sarah. Very few knew her actual face. Mi-young lost herself admiring the jewelry and copied even the way Sarah spoke, her gestures, her posture. But the impersonation was always going to unravel. She was stopped in a shopping mall. The tattoo on her ankle said everything. She had copied Sarah's tattoo almost perfectly. Yet the security guard said the cardholder wanted to handle the matter quietly, that she was free to leave. Only then did Mi-young understand it had all been a trap. Sarah had let her steal, let her imitate, let her build exactly the profile she needed, and then crushed her with it. For Mi-young, the humiliation was already a fact. But for Sarah, a humiliated artisan with no documents could become something far more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose. Because that same woman who had humiliated her was capable of things Mi-young still couldn't fully grasp. On another occasion, Sarah had deliberately drugged a magnate's drink at a party. When the man vomited, she took the most expensive bag in the store to clean up the mess, got down on her knees, cleaned it herself, and refused any form of compensation. For Sarah, everything was a performance. She wasn't selling bags, she wasn't selling brands, she was selling pride, she was selling strategic humiliation, she was selling the feeling of superiority to the ultra-wealthy, and she did it with a precision that bordered on art. Psychology break number 2, the invisible artisan. What separates an ordinary manipulator from a truly dangerous one? The ordinary manipulator lies. The truly dangerous one builds. Sarah didn't deceive Mi-young with empty promises. She dressed her, shaped her, gave her access to a world she had never been able to touch. But in that process did something far more subtle and far more perverse. She lent her an identity, not Mi-young's identity, her own. In psychology, this has a name, borrowed identity. It is the mechanism by which a person with no coherent sense of self absorbs the identity of someone more powerful as a substitute. Not through imitation born of admiration, but through a fundamental emptiness that craves to be filled by something, anything, that feels solid and real. It isn't imitation. It's psychological colonization. Mi-young didn't copy Sarah because she wanted to replace her. She copied her because it was the only way she had found to exist. And Sarah knew. She saw it from day one. That's why she didn't pull away when Mi-young began mirroring her gestures, her words, her tattoo. She watched. She let her build. And when Mi-young reached her point of maximum dependency, she humiliated her publicly. The cycle wasn't accidental. It was designed. First, give identity. Then, make the person depend on it. Finally, strip it away in one move. That isn't ordinary cruelty. It's a cold calculation that answers a single question. Who controls the narrative of who you are? Sarah controlled the narrative of everyone who entered her orbit. The question that remains open, and that we'll see answered across this drama, is when does someone who never had their own identity finally decide to write it for themselves? And whether that moment of rebellion can bring the whole thing crashing down. Later in the video, the price of that moment will become clear in a way nobody saw coming. At that point, Sarah still had one more circle left to conquer. So she began frequenting a high-end bar, specifically requesting a model named Yiwan to serve her drinks. But she always kept a deliberate distance. Her coldness only fed the model's curiosity. One day, Yiwan pretended to accidentally take Sarah's Porsche keys. Predictably, a message followed. When he returned the car, he found her barefoot, eyes distant, as if she had just fled from somewhere. Yiwan took off his own shoes and gave them to her. But when he heard the name Seonsin, he froze. The notorious loan shark, a name that instilled fear across the entire district. Half of Yiwan's circle owed him money. The other half helped him collect it. He couldn't understand what Sarah was doing living with a man like that. Sarah answered calmly. When she was with him, she didn't owe anyone an explanation. Then the atmosphere gradually grew ambiguous. Yiwan told her he wanted to run away with her, half joking, half serious. That night he wouldn't charge her anything. He just wanted one more hour. From that moment, he actually started to care. They sat outside a convenience store like any ordinary couple, eating, talking. That's when he accidentally noticed needle marks and bruises on Sarah's arm. His mind went straight to drugs, to Seonsin. He was flooded with rage and grief at the same time. In a burst of fury, he asked her if she wanted him to end that bastard. Yiwan naively believed that if Seonsin died, Sarah would inherit everything and they could be together. But when his knife was about to reach the loan shark, Sarah stepped in front to shield him. She signaled silently for Yiwan to run. Yet Sarah had just saved the life of the one person who posed the most direct threat to her. Not out of sentiment, but because Seonsin was part of the plan. And plans don't get interrupted. Sarah protected Seonsin not out of loyalty. She protected him because without him, the legal alibi holding her entire identity together would collapse within hours. Over time, Sarah came to know Seonsin better than anyone. Every time he needed dialysis, she quietly prepared everything, carefully tended to his health. But despite that calculated routine, she carried something she couldn't fully control. She told the loan shark that she could no longer tell the difference between truth and lies, that she regretted ever tasting the feeling of wealth. Because once you touch it, you may spend your entire life never truly owning it. Then Seonsin suffered serious complications. He came close to death. Sarah told him she had no regrets, that all she wanted was to keep living under the name Sarah. In the hospital, as he regained consciousness, the loan shark drew up a will leaving all his assets to his wife. But Sarah decided to go through with the kidney transplant anyway. Seonsin asked why she would do that when his death would hand her the fortune immediately. Sarah answered calmly, she could wait a little longer. And judging by the situation, she wouldn't have to wait very long. It was the coldest and most honest thing she had ever said to him. After the surgery, Sarah vanished from Seonson's world as if she had never existed. She gifted Yiwon a luxury apartment as a farewell, told him to forget the past and start a new life. Yet then she turned him into a piece of the machine, sent him to move through the wealthy elite, serving and charming them. Yiwon didn't just get close to wealthy women personally. He also distributed a series of boudoir bags to other models. Those men were generously compensated for spreading the brand's reputation through the upper class. Small details accumulated to build credibility. Credibility became trust. And when trust reaches its peak, it transcends into something that borders on religion. Sarah implemented a strict stratification strategy. Her stores served clients according to their social rank. Limited quantities, queues outside, prices climbing constantly. Direct instructions to staff: remove modestly dressed customers, no exceptions. Boudoir's scarcity strategy was devastatingly effective. And that was when Mi-young froze in front of a shop window. There it was, one of her bags, displayed like a work of art under the boudoir name. Price tag, 50 million won, roughly 34,500 US dollars. In that moment, she understood the entire empire, the entire reputation, Sarah's entire story, built on the exploitation of her talent, and she understood she deserved far more. Back in her room, she found Sarah waiting for her. She confronted her. Sarah shut her down immediately. She weaponized the rumor that Mi-young was a shallow social climber, a reputation built entirely by her own clumsy impersonation. Told her coldly that if she was going to imitate her, she should at least do it properly. Warned her not to get in her way at this crucial moment, and reminded her of everything she had done for her. Then she dismissed her. That was a mistake. A mistake Sarah should never have made. The rage that ignited in Mi-young that day had no reverse gear. She called immigration, reported every undocumented worker in the factory, wiped out, in one move, everyone who knew of her connection to Sarah. Returned to the workshop, erased every fingerprint, every trace that could distinguish her from Sarah. By the time she was done, she had officially become a perfect Sarah. One person with that level of access to Sarah's identity was enough to bring the entire empire down, and Sarah knew it. Mi-young appeared calmly at the launch of Boudoir's new collection. The stage lights reflected off her face, serenely, disturbingly composed. Afterwards, in an empty space, Sarah launched herself at the woman who wanted to replace her. But this battle wasn't about defeating a person. It was about defeating an identity, a past, an entire truth. Sarah had never killed anyone before. Seized by panic, she rushed out of the elevator looking for help. And that was when she ran unexpectedly into her ex-husband, the man whose kidney she had given, the man who had made everything she was possible. She looked up at the logo she had designed herself. Her eyes turned suddenly resolute. She hid her bloodied hands behind her back. Even though her ex-husband was a mob boss, she chose to go back into that room alone. In her frenzy, Sarah thought she saw the woman on the floor open her eyes. For just a moment, that face became her own. Without hesitating, she picked up a decorative object and drove it into that face again and again until it was unrecognizable. Then she loaded the body into a large suitcase and waited for the press conference to end. As the staff cleared the venue, Sarah calmly wheeled the suitcase out and dissolved into the crowd as though nothing had happened. She coordinated with the workers to load the suitcase onto a truck, transported it to the shopping mall where the new boudoir branch was about to open, deliberately took a long, winding route through the interior of the mall, placing herself squarely in the path of every surveillance camera. She built a perfect trail, as if she were simply supervising the fit out. At a point she had calculated in advance, she steered the suitcase into a hidden access point, a secret underground drainage system that Sarah had discovered by accident years earlier, back when she worked there as a shop assistant. But what she didn't expect was that Myung wasn't completely dead. With an unbreakable will to survive, the artisan followed a glimmer of light and crawled through the sewer. On the damp walls of the tunnel, police found hundreds of overlapping fingerprints, evidence that in her final moments, Myung was still fighting. She was just steps away from reaching the surface, but exhausted, out of strength. She died, frozen, in the dark. Just as police were preparing to issue an arrest warrant, Sarah walked into the precinct voluntarily. But the moment she sat down in the interrogation chair, she calmly stated she hadn't come to confess, only to cooperate with the investigation. She denied the fraud. She denied every other charge. Her eyes were ice cold, as if it were all just a simple misunderstanding, as if the real battle was only just beginning. Sarah said the world was like that. It merciful and cold at the same time. On one side, a dazzling party blazing with lights. On the other, someone dying of cold in the dark and nobody ever knowing. Mug-yong immediately zeroed in on Yo-yin's 15 billion won, roughly 11 million US dollars investment. He demanded a direct face-off between the two women. But what nobody expected was that before arriving at the precinct, Sarah had already transferred the full amount back into the businesswoman's account and called it investment returns. Then she made the argument that changed everything. If boudoir wasn't a scam, then Yo-yin couldn't be charged with embezzlement. That single claim shook the Knox director to her core. She had no choice but to confirm it had been a legitimate investment. No formal complainant, no sufficient evidence, no accuser. Charging Sarah became almost impossible. She smiled faintly and walked calmly out of the interrogation room. In the corridor, she threw a brief glance at Mug-yong. Their eyes met for just a second, one calculating, the other holding back words. Outside, the detective and his colleagues immediately reviewed the interrogation footage. The recording reached the moment Sarah said, "On one side, a dazzling party. On the other, someone dies frozen in the dark." Mug-yong ordered the playback stopped, rewound it, watched it again, and realized they had overlooked something crucial. He ordered an emergency arrest. The moment Sarah stepped outside, she was taken. Charge: suspected involvement in the homicide of the woman found in the drainage tunnel. Back in the interrogation room, Sarah asked why the detective was so determined to make her his target. Mug-yong pointed out that the crime occurred on the exact night Sarah hosted the boudoir party. But she looked at him with contempt. She had multiple alibis. That's when he revealed the key evidence. Under the victim's fingernails, skin cells, and blood from the killer. Sarah went completely still for a fraction of a second. Some traces can be wiped. DNA never lies. Mug-yong laid it out. Sarah had inadvertently revealed information only investigators and the perpetrator could know. The victim's cause of death was hypothermia. That detail had never been released to the public. Police concluded that Sarah was the last person to see the victim alive and the only suspect who knew the exact cause of death. He pressed further. If Sarah were truly the mastermind, she would have taken all the money and disappeared. But she hadn't. That meant something unexpected had happened that night. Sarah quietly asked for a cigarette. She said slowly that she had always wanted to quit. The wealthy people she had known were willing to give up cigarettes just to live one more day. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't understand that desire to live. When the cigarette was finished, she composed herself. She told Mug-yong that people believed her, not because she had any special skill, but because she knew exactly what each person craved most: She had also seen the detective's deepest desire in that moment, to hear her confess. Then she shifted register and began citing legal provisions. An arrest warrant must be obtained within 48 hours of detaining a suspect. If there isn't sufficient evidence, the police must release the suspect immediately, and once released, they cannot be detained again for the same crime. That was Sarah's final move. If she ran, she'd be a con artist. If she was arrested, she'd be a murderer. But if she walked free after 48 hours, she'd be declared innocent. On the wall of the interrogation room, the clock was unambiguous. 47 hours remaining. One piece of evidence. One wasted hour. One mistake from the detective. And Sarah walks free forever. Sarah spoke slowly, her voice laced with sarcasm. She said people were determined to believe what they wanted to believe, that even if every piece of evidence pointed to her, that didn't make her guilty. Her composure lit a fire in Mugyeong. He argued that if Sarah weren't the killer, she should be outraged, fighting to prove her innocence. But Sarah just asked if he would really believe her if she did, and continued calmly. If she could prove her innocence, she would have done it long ago. The detective pushed harder, told her there was a way to determine who she really was. A DNA test. Would she be willing to provide a sample? Without hesitating, Sarah opened her mouth for the swab, rolled her finger for the fingerprints. The results left the entire room speechless. Her DNA and her fingerprints were completely absent from every database. They didn't match any sample collected from the crime scene either. Mugyeong saw it all clearly in that moment. Sarah had been a non-person from the very beginning. No real identity. The case hit an unprecedented deadlock. The suspect and the victim were standing right in front of them, and yet they couldn't identify either of them, but which meant finding incriminating evidence against someone who simultaneously existed and didn't exist. In 34 hours, a near impossible task. And in that moment, a possibility occurred to the detective, one he had never before allowed himself to consider. Just as he was about to pursue it, his superior appeared without warning, demanded the case file be transferred to another team, warned him that if he failed to produce evidence within the legal time frame, the arrest would be declared unlawful and the detective would face disciplinary action. Mugyeong didn't back down. His superior looked at him with contempt, said that the more desperate a person became, the more they deluded themselves into thinking they were competent, that his obsession was driven by nothing but career ambition. The weight of it landed hard on the detective. Then finally, Mugyeong returned to the interrogation room, intending to appeal to Sarah's emotions, a softer tone, an attempt to dismantle her psychological defenses, but she just let out a cold laugh. She said con artists are most drawn to highly educated professional people because those people trust their own logic. They believe they are smart enough to never be fooled, and that very belief is their fatal weakness, especially those with a degree of social standing, supremely confident and utterly certain they cannot be deceived. Sarah looked at the detective with deep significance and warned him to be careful, because the type of person she was describing was him. After the psychological approach failed, Mugyeong returned to the facts, asked her where she went and what she did after the party ended. Sarah offered a series of near-flawless statements. She went to the shopping mall to prepare the new branch. Around 10 in the morning, she finished and checked into a hotel to rest. The clock kept running, and Sarah kept smiling. Her phone had remained switched off until police found her. She even proactively offered to review the dashcam footage from her car and the hotel room service log. But the detective found a crack immediately. Sarah's account contradicted the testimony of the Samwall department store president, the woman who ran the mall. She had stated that the boudoir lease agreement had never been approved, that the deal had never existed. One of the two was lying. Mugyong sent his team to verify whether the boudoir area inside Samwal had been under construction. Result: Sarah's account was true, and the construction had taken place, but every trace had been erased. And that was even more telling. Nothing moves in that mall without the president's approval, construction or demolition. It doesn't matter. If someone wiped the evidence, it was on her orders. Mugyong confronted her directly. Why she had denied signing the contract after already having done so. Why she had ordered the security footage deleted. What Sarah had done to provoke a woman of her rank into taking that risk. The answer was completely unexpected. She said she hadn't done it for Sarah. Before the detective confronted her, she hadn't even known she had been deceived. Only after reviewing the footage did she discover the truth. She confessed that she had personally seen Sarah dragging a large suitcase through her mall. She suspected the body might be inside, and that image terrified her. What she did next wasn't to protect the guilty party. It was to protect the mall's reputation. Mugyong caught the exact words she had used: drag it out. That meant the president had watched the footage before deleting it. Deleting it before knowing what happened. Negligence. Deleting it after watching it. Intentional destruction of evidence. But the video was already gone, and without it, the detective couldn't prove she had ever seen it at all. Mugyong proposed a deal, but unexpectedly, the president produced the detective's recording device. She had it the entire time, threatened to end his career if a single line of that conversation ever reached the press. Yet before the conversation closed, she revealed something that changed everything. At the dinner that evening, she had personally seen a woman wearing a dress identical to Sarah's, standing right beside her. 2 identical dresses, 1 designer, a crime scene with blood traces. If Sarah had commissioned both on purpose, police could establish premeditation. The clock, under 30 hours. Police returned to the product launch scene. Severed camera cables, blood traces, signs of chaos. Everything pointed to a premeditated crime. They contacted the owner of the luxury tailoring atelier. She confirmed the dress had been ordered by a regular client named Sarah, and that the order was unusual for one very specific reason. She had been asked for 2 completely identical dresses. Mugyong reasoned that during the fitting, a needle could have accidentally grazed the skin of whoever tried it on. He ordered every DNA sample that might remain in the lining of the fabric to be collected immediately. The forensic lab results came back fast and left everyone speechless. The DNA samples from the 2 dresses didn't match each other. The analysis showed that the DNA extracted from the needle in one of the dresses had a 99.99% match with the victim's DNA. Both dresses had most likely been made for the victim. Factoring in motive, the person who had come prepared to commit the murder was the victim herself. The detective understood in that instant just how terrifying his opponent was. He heard Sarah's words echo back, that people always believe what they want to believe. And the entire direction of the investigation began to shift. The hunter hunted. Think for a moment about what just happened. Mugyong was not a passive victim waiting to be eliminated. She commissioned the dresses. She planned the confrontation. She arrived ready. There is a principle in military strategy called the mirror trap. It occurs when 2 adversaries arrive at the same battlefield with identical ambush plans for each other. Nobody attacks. Nobody defends. Both are waiting for the other to make the first move. The only difference between the winner and the loser isn't the strategy. It's who has less to lose. Mugyong had been building her plan for months. She had erased her trail. She had replicated Sarah's identity down to the tattoo. She had destroyed every witness who could connect them. She arrived at the boudoir launch, ready to make Sarah disappear the same way Sarah always disappeared, without leaving proof that she had ever existed. But Sarah went further. Not because she was stronger, but because she understood something Myung never fully grasped. Identity isn't taken. It's constructed in the minds of other people. And in the minds of everyone who mattered, Sarah was already real. Myung was still nobody. Two women with no legal name, in a dark room, fighting over a life neither of them was born having. Can it even be called murder when the victim also arrived ready to kill? Later in this video, that question becomes the exact center of the board where Mugyeong will have to make the most difficult decision of his career. Using the tailoring atelier's records, investigators traced Myung back to the artisan workshop where she used to work. When they arrived, the place was empty. Machinery, records, materials, all cleared out, every trace erased, as if no one had ever been there. The room had nothing, not a single hair, not a single fingerprint. Absolutely nothing. When the investigation hit its floor, Mugyeong noticed a man working right next to the workshop. He approached him, asked if he had seen the workers from the place. The man said that about 10 days earlier, police had raided the site. Every undocumented immigrant worker had been arrested, all deported. Mugyeong noticed the thick calluses on the man's hands, years of using scissors to cut fabric, an almost universal mark in that trade. The detail hit the detective directly. He thought back to the hands of the girl found in the drainage tunnel. She had the same calluses. Back in the interrogation room, Mugyeong finally allowed himself to touch the hypothesis he had been refusing to consider. And maybe the woman sitting across from him wasn't Sarah. She was Myung. Sarah had tried to eliminate the artisan and take her place, but she had been found out, and the artisan had turned the situation around. If that hypothesis was correct, then Myung had finished Sarah off to assume her identity. Myung had become the person she had always wanted to be. But the detective couldn't get a definitive answer from the woman in front of him. And then something deeper landed. Perhaps the distinction between real and false no longer mattered, because both Sarah and Myung were constructed identities. A real Sarah had never existed from the very beginning. The case seemed to have hit a dead end. But Mugyeong decided to make his move. To shift the situation, he had to attack the one thing his opponent cared about most: the boudoir brand. That he announced he would hand the media the complete story of how Boudoir had manipulated its clients, including the false identity of its founder and her direct connection to a homicide case. The woman ignited with rage. She warned that a police officer who leaked documents from an active investigation could be forced to resign. But Mugyeong didn't give an inch. He said he was only looking for the truth. And if the truth was capable of burning everything to ash, he was willing to strike the match. That night, the boudoir scandal detonated across every media outlet. How the brand had manipulated its clients' trust, how it had concealed the true identity of its founder. Buyers demanded the harshest punishment. Public opinion condemned the identity theft as a severe psychological distortion. Every headline was a direct blow. The woman pressed both hands against her head. Her spirit was on the edge of collapse. In her hallucinations, she saw the entire room flood with water, and her, alongside the boudoir empire she had built, sinking slowly into a dark abyss. In the middle of the chaos, Mugyeong's voice cut through. He said that secrets eventually surface, that when the illusion dissolves, people walk away far more easily than you ever expect. Boudoir could have been real if she herself had been real. Under that unbearable pressure, the woman finally broke. She hammered frantically on the iron door of her cell, demanded to see the detective immediately. Mugyeong made it absolutely clear that a voluntary confession and full cooperation were her only shot at leniency. This time, she appeared to have decided to give in. She admitted the crime. And just as police began to exhale, she burst into tears. Confessed she was Myung. Described how she had disfigured Sarah's face, how she had disposed of the body in the drainage tunnel. that after her death, she had been able to live comfortably under that identity. She confessed to every charge, said she was prepared to accept the punishment, but on her face, not a trace of remorse. Moo-gyong stayed calm. He believed the confession was a shield to protect Boudoir, that she considered the brand more important than her own freedom. His colleagues saw the calculation behind it all. She was exploiting a legal loophole. If the victim were identified as Sarah, the fraud investigation would reach a dead end because the subject of criminal liability would no longer exist. The focus of the case had shifted entirely. Then it was no longer about proving the homicide. It was about determining who the woman in front of him really was. Moo-gyong asked her why she had treated the victim with such savagery. She answered with quiet sadness that Sarah was the kind of person whose disappearance was better for the world than her continued existence. That neither those she had hurt nor Sarah herself truly wanted her to go on living. The detective stated with absolute certainty that all her plans were worthless, because there was only one truth. She was Sarah, and she was the one who had ended Mi-young. The woman answered with contempt that he couldn't prove it. Moo-gyong revealed his final card. He had discovered she had undergone a kidney transplant. The hospital kept tissue samples, cross-referencing them with the original medical records, or her true identity could no longer be concealed. Investigators raced to the hospital immediately. The results would reveal the full truth. A tissue sample in a hospital. That was the single thread the detective had left to prove who she really was. Under 10 hours remaining. Then his phone rang. Bad news. The tissue sample stored at the hospital had mysteriously disappeared. The woman smiled with quiet triumph. She told Moo-gyong he had lost. His reasoning might be logically sound, but it wasn't a verifiable truth under the law. Under the identity of Mi-young, she had confessed to everything, including the homicide. The entire team was frozen. The confession fit the investigation perfectly, but they couldn't prove her real identity. Time was running out. The detention period was closing in on 48 hours. I'll issue the arrest warrant or release her immediately. And once released, she could never be detained again for the same crime. That meant before 6 o'clock, Moo-gyong would have to let her go for lack of evidence, or cross a line that a police officer should never cross. Finally, after a silent internal war, the detective made his decision. In the name field of the arrest warrant, he wrote with deliberate resolve, Mi-young. The name that changes everything. There is a scene in the film Zodiac where Detective David Toschi has spent decades chasing a killer who will never be formally identified. At some point, a colleague asks him how he keeps going, knowing there may never be a trial. And Toschi says something you don't forget, that sometimes the only way to win is to play the cards you were dealt, even if they're not the ones you needed. Moo-gyong wrote that name knowing perfectly well it was part of the trap. He wrote Mi-young even though the woman in front of him was almost certainly Sarah. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't defeat. It was the only move left on the board she had designed herself. Because she had built the game around one rule. Without a verifiable identity, there is no guilty party. And Moo-gyong answered with a rule she hadn't anticipated. Without a named guilty party, there is no release. Justice didn't arrive with the right name that night. It arrived in disguise, incomplete, with a signature that everyone in that room knew was false. But it arrived, and there lies the question this drama leaves open like a wound. Can a verdict be considered just when everyone knows the name on the paper is a lie? Or does justice, should like Sarah, also learn to survive by changing its identity when it has no other choice? The woman was handcuffed and escorted out of the precinct. Cameras, reporters, a barrage of questions. She didn't say a single word. In the courtroom, the The judge found Mi-young guilty of premeditated homicide and illegal disposal of a body. Sentence: 10 years in prison. The case was officially closed. Mug-young was commended as an exemplary officer. The woman entered prison, put on the inmate uniform. As she did, a scar was exposed. The unmistakable mark of a kidney transplant performed years earlier. Years later, the detective came to visit her. He told her that the person known as Sarah had been buried as an unidentified body, and that even without its founder, the boudoir brand continued to thrive. When she heard that, the woman smiled with quiet satisfaction. She looked at Mug-young and asked him who, in the end, he had actually caught. The two turned to face each other in the final moments of the visit. Their eyes carried everything words could never say. Mug-young walked out of that prison without an answer, and perhaps that was exactly what she wanted. The woman who was handcuffed that day had no real name, no fingerprints on record, no verifiable history. She was Sarah, she was Mi-young, she was Dua, she was all of them, and none of them at once. And the justice system had to settle for the only name it could legally sustain. Boudoir still exists. Its bags still sit in the most exclusive shop windows in Seoul. Nobody asks too many questions about its founder. Nobody wants to know the answer. And that, in itself, Buri says more than any sentence ever could. Because this story isn't about a con artist. It's about what happens when a society builds walls so high around privilege that people without access learn to fabricate their own doors just to survive. Sarah wasn't born wanting to destroy anyone. She was born into a world where her own life was worth nothing without a borrowed name and an invented title. And everyone around her chose to believe the lie because it was convenient. Yo-yin invested stolen money and preferred to believe it was legitimate. Seonsun built an identity for his wife and chose not to ask what it was for. Boudoir's clients paid millions for a sense of superiority that wasn't real either. Everyone was part of the game. Sarah was simply the only one honest enough to admit she was playing it. That doesn't justify anything, but it does force us to ask an uncomfortable question. How many Sarahs are we creating without realizing it? If you made it this far, you already know this channel doesn't do recaps. It does autopsies. I need you to do one thing right now. Drop into the comments and answer this. Did Mug-young do the right thing by writing that name? Or did he sacrifice the truth to close a case he could never win cleanly? There's no right answer. And that's exactly what makes this drama unlike anything you've seen before. If this breakdown moves something in you, subscribing takes 3 seconds. 3 seconds for the next video to come straight to you. Because the next K-drama we're going to take apart is just as dark, just as calculated, and you are not going to want to miss it.